Let's take a look at Marco Polo. He went on his trips a little bit earlier than Ibn Battuta, and he was from Italy. He was a Venetian traveler, meaning he was from Venice, which is in Italy, and he went to China under Mongol rule and reported elaborately on what he found there. One thing I want to interject here, though, is that we're not really absolutely 100% sure that Marco Polo actually went on these travels. His uncles clearly visited China, but he may have used their accounts plus Persian travel literature to fabricate a version of his own travels, among other things, glorifying his personal exploits as he went. We're just simply not sure about that. The odd thing is that he fails to mention certain features of China that you would think he would have found really quite noteworthy. One example would be foot binding of many Chinese women in the cities at the time. We'll talk about foot binding later as part of their culture. But we're absolutely not sure if Marco went on these trips or not. If he didn't do it, other Europeans certainly did. Their travels were somewhat less widely ranging than Ibn Battuta's, though the travelers to China sometimes came back via the Indian Ocean. Therefore, they encountered South and Southeast Asia as well as East Asia. But the European travelers, if Marco Polo is to be taken seriously, differed from Ibn Battuta in one respect. They were less uncomfortable in settings outside their religious orbit. They almost had to be less uncomfortable because Christianity had spread less widely at this time. They could not have expected a cultural umbrella that would frame them as a Muslim could expect. But if you put the two cases together, Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, or the Polos, you have an active sense of the new extent to which people could visit distant places, and develop a thirst for travel and adventure. In their ensuing accounts, Marco Polo's book, for example, was on Christopher Columbus's bookshelf later on. They spurred other people to seek trade activities and contact activities that would push them also into the unknown, or at least the less known. Travel, of course, was interesting at the time. It's very clear that travel in this period differed greatly from the kinds of travel that had been possible during the earlier classical era. The travelers traveled further. They encountered far more different kinds of situations, and their accounts are much more consistently accurate than accounts of earlier travelers such as Herodotus, who simply made things up or accepted big tall tale stories when he went beyond his actual travel range. This is a different kind of travel. It reflects a different kind of world. The actual contact patterns need to be further embellished as well. As I noted earlier, the core route for this new pattern of contact that emerged in the post-classical era was an Indian Ocean route connecting Western Asia or the Middle East, which is the Arab territories, the Persian territories under Islam now. Also with South Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific coast of China. This was a series of routes initially forged by Arab merchants primarily, but soon joined by Muslims and others from India, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere, also a number of Persians. This was a series of routes that carried a variety of goods. Particularly important were manufactured goods from China. Silk, of course, but also a glass-type ceramic stuff called porcelain, which we simply call China today. And some other products and spices were available at that time from Southeast Asia or India. This was an Asian-centered trade pattern, and it had the interesting effect, and we see the new importance of these kinds of contacts going on, spurring major manufacturing expansions, particularly in China. In China during the Song Dynasty, which opened up in the 10th century, some historians have actually referred to a Chinese industrial revolution. Now, that term's a little bit misleading. I don't want you to confuse it when we get to the actual period that involves the Industrial Revolution later on, which is mainly in Europe. But there's no question that China was becoming in this period somewhat of a world manufacturing powerhouse. and this is a status that the nation seems to be recovering in our own day. So as we were mentioning, this main trade was an Asian-centered trade pattern and mainly concerned with moving things west to east and east to west. Three patterns were particularly important though, as we paid attention to before. Two routes connected sub-Saharan Africa to this east-west trade and carried African goods not just into the Middle East and North Africa, but into other parts of Asia as well. The easiest route, the one that was most clearly linked with the east-west corridor there, was the coastal route that stretched up the Swahili coastline along the Swahili trading cities that developed on the coast and on the islands of East Africa. But West African trading activities, merchants from places such as Ghana and Mali, also participated actively in interregional trade, using camels and horses to cross the Sahara, and seeing North African traders come down to participate directly, as well as traders, and once in a while, sometimes even as raiders, as some of them invaded. Link number one was the connection that linked various parts of sub-Saharan Africa to North Africa and the Middle Eastern end of the west and east trade routes. From Africa came a variety of goods: gold, slaves, exotic animals, certain other kinds of animal and vegetable products that fed a considerable trade, particularly with the Middle East, but also sometimes beyond that. Handfuls of African slaves even showed up in post-classical China, where you can only imagine what the Chinese people made of these people that were being brought in, and above all, what these people who were being brought in made of their experience in such a strange environment. Another feeder route developed beginning in the 8th and 9th centuries from Scandinavia in northern Europe through what is presently western Russia and Ukraine, passing through the great city of Kiev on its way to the Byzantine Empire, and from there connecting with Arab trade as well. Scandinavian traders coming down through Russia may actually have given Russia its name from the Scandinavian word red, the red hair that many of the traders had who were coming from that area. We don't know that for sure, but it's at least possible. But there's no question that this East Central European North-South trade was a vital one for the region itself, and as it contributed products and merchant activities to the larger East-West flow. Slightly later and more gradually, Western Europe also connected with this trade route as merchants from England and the Low Countries and France began to come down either over land or along the Atlantic coast to the Mediterranean, where they could directly trade into the Middle Eastern areas and also with the areas of the Mediterranean like Egypt. An example of this kind of merchant activity was the famous French merchant from the 15th century, Jacques Couer, who was an advisor to the French kings, a moneylender, but he also frequently traveled to the Middle East in search of products that would sell widely back home. He was just one of many European traders, French obviously, Italian, and many others who made considerable fortunes and sometimes lost them as well in their connections with this new level of international commercial activity. Jacques Couer was disgraced, ironically, in his later life and died in a crusade that was directed presumably against Islam and in favor of Christian conquest of the Holy Land. A major set of routes then stretched from the Middle Eastern center to various parts of Asia. It was connected to much of Africa and a good bit of Europe, both East Central and West. Combination provided a series of activities that